In fact, when Minister Miller announced the cap, Canada's population of non-permanent residents was 2.5 million. We're now up to 2.8 million. So it's basically sold to these students that it's a slam dunk or close to it. So yeah, the students have every right to feel cheated. And, it's just bad program design.
Hi, and welcome to The Missing Middle. I'm Cara Stern.
And I'm Mike Moffatt.
And today we're going to talk about Canada's record levels of population growth and its plan to reduce it substantially, with Immigration Minister Mark Miller telling international students, "You can't all stay."
But before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you.
In a recent interview with Bloomberg, Canada's Immigration Minister Mark Miller had a message for international students. You can't all stay. And he added that people should be coming here to educate themselves and perhaps go home and bring those skills back to their countries. Just a few months ago, we had the minister on to discuss Canada's unplanned population growth and the stresses it was placing on housing, healthcare, and education. And we talked to him about the government's plan to reduce the number of non-permanent residents. Mike, are we seeing any evidence that this plan has started to work at all?
Yeah, not particularly. We're really not seeing any evidence of it working, but we should also note that it's pretty early. Recently, Canada's population broke the 41 million barrier. We've added 1.3 million people in the last 12 months. To put that into context, until about 2016 or so, Canada's population grew consistently by about 320,000 people a year, but last year it grew by 1.3 million. Now, the federal government's looking to reduce that back to about the 300,000 person a year mark, but so far we're not seeing any sign of slowdown.
Where are all these 1.3 million people coming from? You hear a lot about, especially the non-permanent residents being mostly from India. Is that true?
Yeah, so it is mostly on the non-permanent side. India is the largest cohort, but overall, it's two basic programs that are dictating most of it. That 450,000 are from immigration, so that's your traditional permanent residency, and that's a variety of countries around the world. But the bulk of the growth, about 825,000, are from an increase in the number of non-permanent residents. Those are folks here on a time expiring visa, like international students and temporary foreign workers. And everything else is essentially a rounding error. Like traditionally, the way that countries grow is that they have more births than deaths. But in Canada, that difference is only about 32,000 a year or so. Like it's basically a rounding error. And we also had about the same number of people emigrate to other countries. So essentially, all or almost all of Canada's net population growth comes from international migration, with the bulk of it being increases in non-permanent residents, which is disproportionately from India, and the rest being from traditional immigration. Needless to say, like 1.3 million people is a lot, particularly when the majority of them are non-permanent residents who have never been to Canada until becoming an international student. And we really don't have the types of programs and social supports necessary to ensure that they thrive. And this leaves them ripe for exploitation by landlords or workplaces or schools. They're easily exploited, and then to make matters worse, those same non-permanent residents get blamed for everything from housing to doctor shortages, despite the fact that they're just a 18 or 19-year-old from overseas. They're just trying to make their lives better.
I think a lot of people are getting angry at the government. You look at how, especially Trudeau's taking a lot of the blame for it. You hear how people are talking about him and talk about how cost of living has gone up so much under his watch. They seem to know that it's largely the government's fault. But I don't know that the provincial government's getting as much blame. I don't hear it as much, at least not here in Ontario. I tend to hear it as this is a federal thing, even though we've talked about in previous episodes that the provincial government played a big role in cutting the funding for universities and colleges and not having any oversight. So they were able to bring in so many people without actually like having to have any sort of oversight in the way that they really should. Are most of these people who are here, like the 825,000 non-permanent residents, are most of them still students?
Yeah, it's a mix. So we've got about 100,000 that are asylum seekers from other countries who are seeking asylum in Canada for any number of reasons. And some of those asylum seekers are also former international students, but the bulk are international students or their families or international students who are staying after graduation under the post graduation work permit program.
When the immigration minister promised to reduce the number of non permanent residents from 7% of our population to 5%, uh, do we get an idea of the timeline? Are we seeing any evidence that's happening yet?
Yeah, well, so the promise was that that would be over 3 years. So Minister Miller's announcement was in March 2024. So you can say, okay, that's going to happen by March 2027. And so far, no, we're not seeing any evidence of that. But again, it's fairly early. Now, to put it into context, that 5% of the population by 2027 would get us to around 2.1 million non-permanent residents. We're currently at 2.8 million. So that's going to be a reduction of 700,000. And we should be very clear here that the plan is not to go around deporting people, right? That this is a reduction through attrition, not deportation. So the idea here is that there would be fewer incoming non-permanent residents than departing ones. So, for every incoming non-permanent resident that you would see two or three leaving. But so far, that isn't happening. And in fact, when Minister Miller announced the cap, Canada's population of non-permanent residents was 2.5 million. We're now up to 2.8 million.
A lot of them were really counting on staying. Like hearing him say, you can't all stay, made me think, like, okay, well, even if they're not being deported, they're just being told to follow the original plan of you stay for this many years and you leave. I get the sense a lot of them might feel like they're being deported and being kicked out. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think they feel cheated, and absolutely right because they are recruited here with the idea that they will be eligible for the post graduation work permit program and then be able to get permanent residency. That's that the schools recruit them that way. The actual recruiters over in India or the Philippines or wherever recruit them that way. And the government has not been transparent with these folks, right? It's not as if they went in and said, okay, you know what? We're going to bring in 300,000 international students each year, and 60,000 of them are going to get the post graduation work permit. That way, a student can go, okay, my chances are like 1 in 5, and I can make that decision for myself, right? They kind of there's no there's no kind of indication of what their odds are going to be, so it's basically sold to these students that it's a slam dunk or close to it. So yeah, the students have every right to feel cheated, and it's just bad program design.
We know that a lot of the effects that people in Canada have seen has been on the rental market. That's where I expect a lot of international students are. I don't think all of them are buying places. Probably not. Probably most of them are renting. You hear horror stories of people renting like 6 people to a room or more, sometimes a dozen, 20 people to in a basement apartment. Like there's some horrible stories out there. But we do see the impact on the rental market. And if there's going to be a decrease, when do you actually expect people can actually maybe notice a decrease in prices in rentals?
Well, I think this summer is pivotal, particularly in college and university towns across Ontario and British Columbia, which are the two provinces where we see by far the most international students. Now, interestingly, in the first half of the year, we've actually seen an increase in the number of international student visas issued. It was 216,000 this year, but between the beginning of the year and the end of May. Previous year, it was only 200,000. But I don't think that means that we're going to somehow see more international students. I think what's happening are colleges and universities are just kind of front loading the number of students who can come in, and it's really going to drop off in the second half of the year. So it's still early, but it does seem that in these college and university towns, we're not seeing on the ground the type of rent increases we've seen in previous summers, with one notable exception that I've seen, and that's the
Guelph.
city of Guelph. Guelph, yeah, exactly. But even Guelph is a special case because that actually is coming from an increase in domestic enrollment, that the University of Guelph decided to increase domestic enrollment, maybe in part to make up for the loss of international students. I don't exactly know what's going on there.
Feels so unfair to the students. Like, you hear about Guelph right now being a place that, like, if you they have way more people expected to come into the program than could possibly be housed in anywhere near Guelph. And so I felt horrible for those people going into first year thinking, oh, I'll get a spot on residence, or if not residence, I'll find something. And like, they're not finding things.
It's brutal. I feel so bad for those incoming students and their parents that they thought they'd get a residence spot and it's not happening, and then you go, okay, well, and a lot of them are from the GTA, thinking, oh, well, how expensive can Guelph be? Turns out it can be very, very expensive. So that is a huge problem. Now, fortunately, and again, this is kind of anecdotal because a lot of the data we only have, is from May, going into the beginning of June. But so far, we don't seem to be seeing those rent increases in cities like London, Kitchener, Waterloo, Kingston, and so on. But it could happen. I think we have to look into August, September, get that data to see whether or not this is making a difference. But I certainly hope it is, because this is just, we're locking, a generation of students out of, moving to another town to go to university or college, simply because they can't afford to live there.
Yeah, having an option to move out is huge. I think a lot of people really value the time that they spent the first time they moved out of their parents' home was often to a residence or somewhere near a university. That's a really great experience for a lot of people. And I think it's a great place for people to kind of build friendships that you wouldn't. It's really hard to do that when you're commuting to a university. I know that, like, if you show up for class and leave, like, you're not getting the same experience as someone living on campus. And so hopefully that continues to be an option for people, because not having the options is not great.
Well, absolutely. So, and for some people, living at home is an option, right? That I did my undergrad at Western, and I lived in London, and my parents live about 7 or 8 kilometers from the university, so I could drive or bike, which I did quite a bit, or take the bus and go there. But if you are, I'll give an example. So I've had Ivy students who live in St. Thomas, which, to drive from St. Thomas, Ontario to Western's campus, that's about 45 minutes each way. And they do it.
And their parents have to buy them a car, or they have to buy a car, which is not cheap.
Which is not cheap, and it's not great for the environment, right? That to have have all these students have to drive 45 minutes each way every day to go to school, but they do it simply because living near campus is cost prohibitive. So yeah, again, if you're from Toronto, okay, yeah, you've got a lot of options for college and university, but if you live in another community, it's either doing a very long commute or perhaps not going at all.
Thanks so much for watching and listening, and thanks as always to our producer, Meredith Martin.
If you have any burning housing or international student questions, please feel free to reach out to us at missingmiddlepodcast@gmail.com.
And we'll see you next time.